Hello, welcome to the Ecology and Humans in the Environment chapter or unit. The two chapters in your book are 18 and 22, in case you're one of the people that reads this information in the textbook. We'll first begin with ecology, and then we'll end the unit with humans in the environment, which is chapter 22. So if you're going to read this, go to chapter 18 in your textbook. All right, so let's begin. This is lecture number 1. A lot of the beginning of this unit is giving you terminology and explaining the terminology. So beware of the terminology on your test. What you're going to get hit with is terminology, but not just terminology. You're going to get hit with examples. So understanding what these words mean and how they relate to real life things is going to be the most important thing that you need to pick up. Okay. So this chapter is basically the ecology chapter. And what is ecology? This is when you're studying humans, for example, living organisms and humans are a big part of ecology. Living things and non-living things, how they interact with each other, and how relationships come about due to them just being in contact with each other. Now, interdependence, this word, am I going to ask you what this means on the test? Probably not. But am I going to ask you scenarios that are interdependent? Yes. So, what are interdependent scenarios? These are cause and effect scenarios. So, this picture here shows you interdependence. It shows you how photosynthesis, and we covered this in the first quarter, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are linked to each other. So, when it says down here, they're usually cause and effect scenarios. Well, let's go through this one. Photosynthesis, we're going to say, okay, it's a cause. Which organisms do photosynthesis? Usually plants and algae, seaweeds, things of that sort. They perform photosynthesis. This is a process. What do? They make oxygen and sugar, glucose. All right. Glucose is food, oxygen is air that we need. Other living organisms, like a dog or a human, they use the food, the sugar, and the oxygen. And by using that food, they're able to do a process called respiration. So they use these to do cellular respiration. In cellular respiration, they produce CO2 and water as a waste product. And guess what? CO2 and water are now used in photosynthesis. So they are interdependent on each other, they are linked to each other. All right. An example, when we have heavy rains in California. Okay, so we had heavy rains a couple years back. What did that lead to down the road? Well, when you have heavy rains, especially here in Southern California, we'll get a lot of brush that starts to grow, scrub and brush vegetation. And that stuff is very flammable. So when we have heavy rains one year, we can expect a very rough fire season in the next season when it gets drier. Okay. So in a wet season, you don't have fires, you get rain. But when the season's dry, then we would get fire as a result of excessive rain. So there's interdependence and relationships going on with that stuff. Okay. Another example, heavy rains means there's more plants. And if there's more plants, there's more things that eat the plants. Herbivores are the things that eat the plants. Okay. You don't need to know this example, but I'm just giving it to you to show you interdependence. This is a long one, actually. This is one that was in your book. So heavy rains leads to more plants. More plants, in this case, leads to acorn production. Acorn production leads to more herbivores or things that eat the plants. Okay. These are mammals that eat these plants. These are herbivores. They're vegetarians, basically. If there's more mammals in these areas, guess what? There's more ticks in the areas. And what do ticks do? They burrow into mammals and they feed off the blood. But the problem is, during a heavy and then these ticks, what do they do to humans? If they bite humans, they can lead to Lyme disease in humans. This is common for humans. So when humans get Lyme disease, that's usually because of ticks. Why is there more ticks? There's more ticks when there's more mammals because there's more food for them. More mammals. How's there more mammals? When there's more food for the mammals. How do we produce more plants for the mammals? We need rain to do that. So it's showing you all these cause and effect relationships. You will get these on your test, these types of relationships. Now, they organize. There's levels of organization, kind of big to small. Think of biosphere as most inclusive or biggest. It's the Earth. The Earth is a biosphere. Okay. The living portion of the Earth is the biosphere. It goes to the very bottom of the ocean and it goes to the tallest mountain and it goes above the tallest mountain, actually, because birds are flying in the air. So we're talking about the Himalayas, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. There's birds up there and they fly above the tallest mountain in the world. So you're talking above the tallest mountain in the world, there is life located there. and down to the very bottom of the ocean, even below the ocean also. There's some life there. So you're talking the biosphere is pretty huge. It's all the living portion of the earth. Ecosystems, the next part. This is living and non-living things interacting. That's an ecosystem. Now, you can't even count how many ecosystems there are on Earth. There's ecosystems within your house probably right now. So ecosystems can be small, they can be big, but you can't even count how many ecosystems. The biosphere is just made up of millions, if not billions, of ecosystems. Community. Well, this is where living interacts with other living, specifically different species interacting. Populations is the same species, all right? And then you can even break them down into smaller groupings. So biosphere, the most inclusive, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, let's define some parts of the ecosystem. If you see the word biotic and abiotic, bio, this is living parts. You put an A in front, it means not. So living, not living. What are the living parts of the ecosystem? These are all the organisms, the bacteria, the fungus, the plants, the animals, you name it. Okay, everything alive in that ecosystem. The non-living stuff, temperature, pH, soil. Well, soil does have some living components, but let's say the sandy part of the soil would be not living. How much oxygen is in the air, how much humidity, how much water is in the air. These are all non-living factors that make up an ecosystem. Community, I already mentioned it. This is different species interacting. Now remember, this is different species. It says here different organisms, different species interacting make up a community. Populations are the same species, okay? So different populations make up communities, okay? Species is, we already defined this in a previous chapter, but these are organisms that can mate and produce fertile offspring. So species make up the population. Different populations of different species make up communities. Where an organism lives, this is their habitat. We're gonna towards the end of the unit, we're gonna have names for these habitats. This is a freshwater habitat. This is a marine habitat. This is probably a grassland. This is a tundra. So these habitats generally are named after large geographic or large areas on the planet. Tolerance curve. So what is this? Well, tolerance curves, they always go up and then they come down. And what do they show us? They're usually a graph, they're graphs, and they give us an idea of performance. So it could be how many organisms are alive, or fitness, their ability to survive is what fitness means in case you forgot. And they give you a range of conditions they can survive in. The range where they peak at, this would be the optimum or the main or the best range. So the top of this range, this optimum range, the top would be their optimal niche. And we'll explain to you what a niche is in a second. So this could be their optimal pH that they can survive, their optimal temperature that they can survive. Anything in regards to their best area they can survive. But there's a whole range that they can survive in. It just might mean they don't survive as well, or they don't do as well, they're not as healthy, but they can survive. Okay. So once you go beyond your tolerance curve, that's generally death, zone of death, zone of death. So humans, for example, we have an optimum range of oxygen that we need in the air to survive. It doesn't have to be perfect for us to survive. It could be a little low, it could be high. But if oxygen levels get too low, we would be in our zone of death, for example. So you got to understand there's a range of conditions that we can survive in. Temperature, it gets too hot, we would die. That's hot as over here. It gets too cold, we would die. So there's a range of conditions that organisms can live in. They can only tolerate. So this shows you what they can tolerate or survive in. Now, acclimation. Now, this is kind of a gross picture of this leathery looking skin, and I show it to you guys on purpose. And then there's this kid sticking his tongue out. Probably, I don't know if that's his mom or his grandma, but they look very old. They may not be old because when you go out in the sun a lot and don't use sunscreen, your skin ages badly. It turns into like leather, for example. And that's what it starts to look like as you get old and you continue to tan it. Well, what is acclimation? Lamarck, if you remember back to Darwin and Lamarck would have said acclimation is a type of evolution. And acclimation, technically, Lamarck called it an acquired trait. All right. So acquired traits are not adaptations. Acclimation is an organism's ability to adjust. So humans, we can adjust. We can live in when it gets a little cold. We can live in temperatures that get a little warm. When it gets too warm, we sweat. Our body can adjust. When it gets cold, we do things. We shiver. We can do things to adjust and maybe move and get a little warmer, and that's how we could survive cooler temperatures. All right. So we have a range where we can acclimate it, we can tolerate it. All right. So this relates to the tolerance curve. This is the range that you can adjust your body, or you can adjust your internal conditions. Somehow your body can adjust them on a cellular level and allow you to survive those conditions. Okay. For example, like bacteria, if it gets too salty, they'll die. If it gets, for example, so they can adjust their internal conditions, so they go beyond their tolerance range. You can only acclimate so much, and then you'll go beyond your tolerance range. Controlling internal conditions. Now, let's talk about this. There's two kinds of organisms. There's generally, when we're talking about animals, we're talking about warm-blooded and cold-blooded. Okay, so let's talk about cold-blooded. Cold-blooded organisms, they're called ectotherms. They lose their heat to their environment. Okay, so what does that mean? It means they can't regulate their internal, they can't get warmer by just moving around like we could. We are warm-blooded. So insects, amphibians, reptiles, if it gets too hot outside, they can't even cool themselves off either. It happens to them in reverse there. They would get too hot too quickly. So you see reptiles in the summer months, yes, when it's warmer, but you don't see them hanging out in the sun for very long, or they will get overheated. They generally want to hide in the shade, okay, for a lot of the day. And then they'll come out and get food and hunt, but they could overheat easily. When it's cold, you don't see too many of these guys either. Why? When it's cold, they get too cold. They can't heat up their inside of their body, and the cold temperatures would ruin their enzymes and they would die. Okay, so conformers do not regulate conditions. They're generally cold-blooded, and their environment determines what their inside is like. Too cold, it gets too cold inside. Too hot outside, it gets too hot inside, and they struggle to survive. All right. Regulators. We are regulators, mammals. Here's J-Lo. Here's birds. Here's a mammal. What do? Well, they are endotherms. They can create heat on the inside of their body. If we move, we can stay warm. All right. So regulators can control their internal conditions. They actually generally, because of this, we can tolerate generally a wider range of conditions. All right. So regulators can tolerate a wider range specifically because they can control their internal environment. All right. Now, another way organisms deal with their environment, sometimes they have to go into hibernation, or what the technical term would be dormancy. Okay. So sometimes you just got to take a nap during the winter, most of the winter, and save your energy. Yes, bears get skinnier during the winter. They don't eat or eat much at all, if at all. And they get skinnier throughout the winter while they're hibernating. And yeah, they do come out a little thin. Then they go looking for food. But when they come out, it's spring and there's more food that's out there because the sun starts shining, plants start coming to life, organisms that eat the plants start coming out, and now there's more food for this guy to come out of dormancy and nourish himself for the next window of time. Okay. Some things migrate. They actually leave. They go to areas that are warmer. Birds flying south. Why? In the winter, it's cold in the north. Our winter, it's so cold. You go north, it gets colder and colder and colder. So what do a lot of organisms do? They will go south. They will migrate. Currently, what is happening on the planet right now, it is climate change is getting warmer. So organisms are leaving where it's warmer and going to where it's cooler, actually. That is happening on our planet right now. So a lot of equatorial organisms are, if they are able to, are trying to move more north towards kind of like where we live in San Diego, where it's a little bit more moderate right now. So migration is moving to somewhere where it's more habitable. We will stop there.